I am calling this joint study session of the Sausalito Marin City School District and Willow Creek Academy Board of Trustees to order. 4:05 p.m.
Great, and I'm calling to order the joint board study session between Willow Creek Academy and the Sausalito Marin City School District at 4:06 p.m. There we go.
Yay! Let's pledge allegiance. Mr. Weisheimer,
You ready?
start us off.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of
the United States of America and to the republic
for
which it stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God,
indivisible,
liberty
and
justice
for
all. Yay!
All right.
Dr. Garcia, can you just cue us up on the oral communication and our reason for being here?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Just want to bring us back here. Again, we're here, part 2. We're back at it a few days later. I hope everybody had a fun or restful or otherwise 4th of July weekend, whatever you were looking for there. Quick reminder, this is a joint study session between our two boards. It is open to the public. The public can observe but not participate in the meeting. We will take one round of comments from the public prior to starting the meeting. And before we get into that, just want to guide us in our guiding principles, centering the option that is best for kids and families. We're here to collaboratively study the unification plans, provide guidance for community feedback, build trust and communication. Omawali Satterwhite is our facilitator again tonight. He will facilitate, process, observe, and keep time, wanting to keep us grounded and focus on race, equity, and opportunity, and really focus on the opportunities that unification provides us in closing the opportunity gap and creating more equitable outcomes for all of our students in the 94965, as well as, wait a minute, sorry, these were supposed to be invisible slides, but they are visible. Just bear with me here. Want to ground us again in the spirit of consensus building, collaboration, and community engagement. At the last map, we covered some of the work that we had done. We created community agreements. Dr. Satterwhite, will you remind us of our community agreements tonight?
Yes. For the public, what happened at the last meeting was that the two boards took a recess, went into recess, and paired up one member from each board for the most part. And in those pairs, during that recess, were asked to develop 2 community agreements individually and then together. Those various community agreements from the groups, the pairs, the teams were brought back to the joint board meeting in plenary. And what you see before you now is the master list of community agreements that were accepted by supermajority consensus of this board, and perhaps unanimously, but if not, really, really close to a super majority. And those agreements are to ask, to learn, listen, and understand, question our assumptions, assume nothing, look through an equity lens, respect each other's voice, be real, share airtime, stay calm and be present, keep an open, independent mind, stick to the agenda and goals, respect and hear out the speaker, ask for clarity, and honor and value the diversity of opinion. So in essence, is to listen, to ask, to be respectful, and to share the airtime while you look through an equity lens.
Thank you, Dr. Satterwhite. Want to just quickly walk folks through what we did the last meeting. We covered the heat map around organizational structure, and then took a look at the traditional, the dependent charter, and the hybrid options, and the 5 categories of implementation, facility, staffing, budget, and curricular flexibility. And then we looked at timing options. We looked at options. We looked at COVID-19 operations. We looked at general synergies around unification, as well as issues and challenges. We looked at a timing option for September 2020. We looked at a timing option for September 2021. We looked at a timing option for January 2021. And then we looked at a phased approach of unifying the middle school in September of this year and the remaining grades at a later date. And that is where we put a pin in our final meeting. And so before we open it up to public comment, just wanted to see if any trustees had any lingering questions hanging out from where we left it.
Yeah, Dr. Garcia, this is Jim Henry.
Hey, Jim.
Hi. One thing that I have thought about following the last call is there was a request that we see some advanced materials to make sure our study sessions are as productive as possible, because it's always good to have questions formulated around the content that we're discussing. And I think it would
Mr. Henry, you're not coming through. Could you repeat the last comment?
Jim, you're breaking up. We can't hear you. I think I know where he's going, however. We had a discussion around sending out the slide deck to trustees prior to this meeting. The Unification Task Force came away from that meeting with the takeaway that we actually really wanted to present the slides, and that we may need a follow-up session to this or two, pending people's questions after seeing the slides. Jim, I'm going to recommend you maybe recall in. It's very, very hard for us to hear anything you're saying.
And while we're waiting for Mr. Henry's return, the question was whether or not any of the members from either board had any questions, comments, or reflections on where we ended up at the last meeting. Hearing none, you could wait a moment for Jim to come back so that he can state his point.
Well, just in the interest of time, as we wait for him to call in, why don't we see if there's any desire from the public to comment? We really want to get into the content so that we can get through it tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, I think everybody's anxious to take it rolling into the content, so it'd be great to get public comment. It'd be great to get the
Thank you.
Let's see here. I see a hand from Yasmin McGrain. I'm going to recognize Yasmin. For those of you that are unused to using Zoom as a platform, if you click on the participants list, it'll allow you to do things like raise your hand if you click on your own name. Go ahead, Yasmin.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say that one thing that really stood out to me from last week's meeting was all the laughter and the interaction that you all had, the camaraderie. I mean, this was your first ever kind of historic joint board meeting that everybody's been, and I know you all have as well, been waiting for. And I just wanted to recognize that people who listened and watched probably felt like me, that it was really hopeful to see how you interacted. I think for me, it also speaks to the culture of both schools and that they really will mesh well together as we move forward. This was a sign of that. And as we all know, school culture is going to be a big part of our success. And if anybody is interested and curious to learn more about what the other school culture's like, to really talk about what they love about their own school culture, maybe imagine for a minute what a unified school culture would look like. We are having a very casual coffee meeting on Zoom, not this Saturday, but next Saturday. I'll be posting it on Nextdoor tomorrow. It's open to everybody across Sausalito, Marin City. So if you're interested, just go on Nextdoor and search Coming Together Coffee. And again, thank you for your interaction, and I hope there's some laughter tonight. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. The next effort from the public to comment is Council Member Joe Burns. I want to recognize Joe Burns. Welcome, Sausalito City Council Member Joe Burns.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Itoko Garcia. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, I just had a kid yelling at me at one ear and trying to get on this. But I want to say that, the City Council has been supportive of this process as far as unification in a very constructive manner, that we can come to the best educational option and options for the 94965. It is important to do it quickly. It is most importantly to do it the right way, in that we are merging and bringing two schools, two educational platforms, two governances, facilities, all these things together. That merging then sometimes, changes the individual product that existed before that. And I think we want to make sure that those individual products are brought into that merger in the best way possible. So it isn't a race. It is definitely something that we need to do very constructively. These conversations that I've been watching this last meeting has been so dynamic and deep that I know you're on the right path and you have the right minds, and I surely appreciate the work you've been doing. It is unbelievable. I think one of the things that Jim Henry might have been saying is it's not just the slide deck of the presentation, which I see you'd want to keep to the meeting itself, but any other documentation that would attach to an agenda item as far as availability for the public to get up to speed. And that's really the Brown Act's intent on agenda items, is that there's enough evidence in there to both find or get the information that you can make a public comment to. So I think that's really what Jim might have also been getting to. But I agree, Dr. Garcia, your slide deck should definitely stay to the presentation, as it can get confusing otherwise. Great work, you guys. I'm so impressed in the hours you've been putting into this. Thank you on behalf of Sausalito.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate your support. Next member of the public to comment is Tanya Zelinskas.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Tanya. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to try really hard not to unmute myself at an inappropriate time when I'm saying goodnight to my kid like I did last week. I think, as I know a lot of people here, I'm a Willow Creek parent, and I am very excited about unification, as I mentioned last week. I think in general for parents, it would be great, and I'm assuming this is what we're going through today, is just getting our sort of minds around what unification looks like on a practical level. Do we have K through 5 at one campus and 6 through 8 at another? So I think that will be really helpful for parents to have those details, just to get behind unification. Also, just, the assurances, obviously at both schools, there's a lot of beloved staff. At Willow Creek, I think there's always a concern about losing staff members who, are a huge part of the community. For me, when we talk about community and culture, that's what I'm thinking of when I talk about it, because I know things are going to shift in a positive way. And then the third part, which is kind of out of all of our control, is coronavirus. And if we can address in the process of unification, especially given that over the last week things look so much worse, more people might be considering Zoom learning or remote learning, that we're really excited about going back to school. I'm really excited for my kids to be physically at school. I'm extremely nervous about it. So hearing that we're talking about smaller cohorts is really great, but also, what is sort of our plan for remote learning in the school district as we're also working through this process of unification?
Thank you. I do believe that we'll get to those questions tonight, but if not, we've got them recorded, and we'll make sure that we do. Next person wishing to comment is Jenny Smith.
Hi, Sausalito. I'm in New York City, and I am so, not for a good reason, but I'm so happy to see what I'm seeing on my screen. This is everybody. Like, I don't have to see with one set of eyes in Marin City and one set of eyes where I work. This is beautiful. So I am smiling from ear to ear with this. I have to say, from a teacher perspective, that I have a concern, and there's no problem here. These are just things that I would sort of like want on a list of things that get checked off as we move forward in what looks like a really good direction. One of those would be, I would love to work shoulder to shoulder with a more proportionate representation of teachers of color. More African-American teachers would rock my world. I would also call for, I don't know what you guys are thinking about in terms of dates that school would start, but I would love to see like teachers come back in August like planned, but maybe not having kids until after Labor Day, so that we can use those first couple of weeks to create a community that's a web, that's a net, that's going to hold all these kids together, whether we're in school or virtual. I'd love to see a big chunk of those 2 weeks go to some kind of anti-bias, anti-racism training. I think that would really create the hug that we're hoping this school district can become. And that's what I would really like. Thank you guys for moving forward with courage and conscientiousness. I'm really proud to be part of this change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. We appreciate your voice. The next member of the public that I'd like to recognize is Jen Conway. Welcome, Jen.
Hey there. Hey, everyone. I echo the folks that shared their feelings on the last meeting. It was great to see the camaraderie. It was excellent to, even though maybe felt awkward to some of you, watching you go through the agreements exercise. I think it was a foundational, important thing to do. So thank you for allowing us to be observers in this process. I have a small logistical ask. I don't know if we're able to do Facebook Live again, Dr. Garcia, but there were several hundred views of that video. Oh, and there you go. Awesome. I think it got a lot of interest from the public, both during the meeting and after. So thank you for being open and for clicking on that button for us right now.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I was like, we better start going on Facebook Live. I just had to do some things with hosting. And I do want to say for any and all members of the public, and thank you so much, Jen, for making that point. Details of this meeting, slides, all of that, if you go back and watch the Facebook Live recording or watch the recording of the Zoom meeting posted on the district website, and I'm sure, Kurt, we can maybe get it posted on on the Willow Creek website as well. But
It's posted.
I did,
beautiful.
yeah,
Thank you.
and I'll do it again.
Yeah, the public can kind of see some very close details that way. So thank you.
Thank you.
The next member of the public wishing to comment is Lisa Bennett.
Hey everyone, thank you for giving us some time to speak. I really appreciate all the progress that's been made so far. And I was thinking back to the culture and climate work group that I was on and how we actually slowed down before we sped up. And I hope that there's a time and a moment in this process, if needed, where everyone can slow down first before rushing through to something they're not ready for. So I just sort of welcome that into this process and really want to thank everyone for all the hard work over the last year. It's been wonderful to be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. The next member of the public that I'd like to recognize is Lau Gonzalez. Lau, go ahead.
Hi. I'm going to be quick because I know there's been a lot of comments and time is an issue here. I want to thank everybody who has been a part of this so much. I wanted to participate a lot more and life is difficult and I couldn't, so I'm so thankful for the people that did participate so much to do this. And I love hearing how the conversation has changed so much in 1 year. It just makes me really hopeful for when my children start school next year. And I loved what Lisa said. I think it's really important. I love the timeline and trying to shoot for unification as soon as possible. I also think it's really important to be very careful in the way that happens, especially with COVID. And I don't know, maybe COVID could, in a weird way, help things slow down a little, and with the reduced groups, maybe more staff will be needed. So it could be a nice way to keep all of the staff from both schools, because I know they're both great from what I hear. And basically just a thank you to everyone that's been working on this.
Thank you so much for your participation and support. I have one more member of the comment indicating that they'd like to comment. I'd like to recognize Mr. Peter Van Meter. Peter, one more after him just came up. Mr. Peter Van Meter.
Am I turning myself on? Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm just wondering about when the curriculum of the combined schools will be decided to basically merge the academic programs of the two together. And that may have already been covered, but just curious to get a handle on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We will go into it tonight. And I think the real answer to your question also was kind of put forward by Ms. Schmidt from Willow Creek when she talked about the teachers working together to create that curriculum. But we will have some conversation around curriculum tonight. Hopefully that'll help to answer your questions.
Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Damian Morgan. Damian.
Hello, you hear me? Thank you.
Yes, we can, sir. Good evening. How are you?
Doing wonderful. How are you, sir?
All right.
That's good. I want to say I know many of you have put a lot of hours into this, and I appreciate each and every one of you that have put in many hours. And again, thank you all for probably hundreds of hours you put in. I gotten to know Miss Emily Cox and Jenny Smith over the last year or so, and you know they were helpful with the basketball team, and Josh Bell helped out a lot too with transportation. Thank you, Josh. But Jenny and Emily helped out a lot with communication, you know, schools and all that. So, you know, things are going in the right direction. So I appreciate everybody. But what I want to get to is that, you know, we sometimes, I guess the community can still, after the world spoke, you know, the last month of the riots and all that, the world, not just the United States, but the world spoke about race relations. And I'm not saying anything that any of us doesn't know. It's plain and simple. But as we go forward, I want to make sure that the, not concerned. I don't think it will have influence, but I want to maybe a reminder to Mr. Garcia, who I went to school with at Tam High, as same class, 92, as I continue to get texts and emails from our old classmates regarding our school district. Every few days, texts and emails from our classmates. What the hell has happened in Sausalito, Marin City? I have to explain all the time. Explain. And what I want to say is that I hope that the real estate people, the real estate heads, do not influence us going forward. I hope the real estate sales, I hope the real estate driven people who worry about sales and money do not influence us going forward over education for students. I didn't say black and brown. I didn't say white. I said students, because everyone deserves a quality education. Even though we know black and brown have gotten the worst end of it, but all students deserve a quality education. And I'm going to say it again. I hope real estate heads do not influence us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I do not see any further intent from the public to comment, meaning that brings us to our unification plan options.
So just to comment, Dr. Garcia,
Yes.
the process, this is for the public, will be quite similar to what was used last week, so that different aspects of the plan will be presented by members of the Unification Task Force to the joint boards. And then there will be an open period for board review, comment, feedback, discussion around those various topics. And generally speaking, those topics will be facilities, staffing, budget, curriculum, governance, and related matters that have had in-depth study and that bear the recommendation of the Unification Task Force. So at your pleasure, Dr. Garcia, we can begin.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Satterwhite. And I just want to call Jim Henry back in. I know, Jim, you were trying to make a comment and you got cut off. I don't know if we covered it or not, but I wanted to just give you an opportunity to speak your piece, sir.
Well, let me just see if the audio is coming through now. Can you hear it all?
Dramatically better.
Yes.
Terrific. I think my comment was somewhat covered by Mr. Burton's comments from the public, but mainly I was going to request that following the discussion and the presentations being made for those topics that we're covering, I think it would be useful to both boards who aren't participating, members not participating in the Unification Task Force, to have the benefit of any background materials, data, etc., that would be useful in each of us really independently getting up to speed on things, so we can all be very informed in the sequence of conversations we're likely to have. That was all, just a request. Thank you.
You got it, sir. Happy to make that happen, and thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. The first first plan option we would like to share with you folks is around organizational structure. And I'm going to invite some of my friends from the Unification Task Force to help me with these slides. First person that is going to help me is Lexi.
Hey, hi everybody. Thank you for attending and public for logging on. When we met last week, we looked at a heat map. We talked about different structures of the school that could be possible. Just to recap, the 4 structures that we looked at last week and that the Unification Task Force has studied are an all-traditional structure, an all-dependent charter structure, an independent charter structure, and a hybrid structure that would be just what the name implies, a hybrid between a traditional school and a charter school. So the task force decided to put up one example of a plan option with the intent that this would springboard into discussion amongst the two boards about the different variables we could have in a structure. So this particular example is a hybrid option. The traditional school would be the in-person K through 8 learning, and the dependent charter component would be the online distance learning component. The reason why we decided to put this up as a good discussion springboard is that the budgetary concerns over a hybrid they got a green in our heat map, and the reason for that was that with the traditional school component, that would pose the least risk to the loss of basic aid, which continues to be a question. With regard to the oversight and governance of the hybrid school, the committee recognizes, and I think both boards recognize, that requires that the community be trusting and have faith in the district board. So because it would be overseen by the district board, and there would be an advisory board, and I'm going to talk about governance in the next slide, but that there would be an advisory board working with the district board on oversight and governance of the hybrid school. This kind of model would not require an interdistrict transfer agreement because we would have the traditional option to complement the charter option. It would also not require a vote of the existing district teachers to convert to a hybrid, because we would continue to maintain the traditional component as well. So this is an example of things that that would go into the structure. Obviously, there's other types of structures we can look at, but that was what we decided to use as the springboard into discussion about structure.
And maybe Dr. Garcia, you could address kind of some of your ideas around the distance learning charter, and how you envision that would partner with a traditional K-8.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Lexi and Caroline. Just to clarify, this option is an all traditional option, PK through 8, unifying both schools, and then having an online dependent K-8 charter. And the idea behind that is we understand that, we heard from a few parents tonight. Some of us that have school-age kids are really eager to get our kids back at school with the right safeguards and, sanitary cohorts and following public health guidelines. And then we realize that we may have a group of parents who, for many reasons, may not be quite so eager to bring their kids back to school. And so we feel like it's very important that we have a robust distance learning option for anyone. And the benefit of doing an online dependent charter school to support that distance learning option is it allows us to maximize revenue streams. So any out-of-district students, we would still get 70% LCFF for anybody enrolled in distance learning, and any out-of-district students that wanted to remain in our schools. And I think both organizations are committed to serving the out-of-district families that are currently here, would be able to attend the all-traditional school. And we wouldn't get the 70% LCFF revenue that we get at a charter school. But because we are now a district of choice in the 2021 school year, we'd get 25% revenue there.
Thank you. And then just to clarify, the all traditional, that could encompass in-class and distance learning within the all traditional program. It's not just only in class, right?
Correct. Yeah, I think what we have found is there are basically two main strategies around distance learning, and they're called synchronous and asynchronous learning. Anything that involves a teacher live, right? So synchronous learning means that the teacher's there with the kids teaching, and the kids are on a platform like this over Zoom, very much like this meeting. They're having a live interaction with the teacher. They may be getting content shared on their screen or questions posed, or they may break out into chat rooms like we did in the last meeting. But that the learning and the teaching is synchronous. It happens at the same time. Another model is asynchronous instruction, where teachers record lessons and students can access them at any time. The teacher doesn't need to be live. What we have found is a couple challenges with asynchronous instruction. One, if a kid has a question or they need some extra help, there's nobody there. You're talking to a recording. And two, in order to create high quality asynchronous instruction, either our school district needs to become highly proficient at video production, or we need to spend a lot of money on video production, or our teachers need to become highly proficient at video production, none of which seem to be the right option, or the most cost-effective or least complex option. And so the homeschooling or the distance learning doesn't have to have an online dependent charter, but that's absolutely an option. But it's an option under both configurations.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
In order to maintain funding of the dependent charter, is it important that it be an online only, or could it develop post-COVID into something that's more personalized learning choice, or something that incorporates online, but does that compromise any type of funding or part of this organizational structure at all?
Well, I think it gets us into sort of the hybrid plan options that we've looked at, and when we have a hybrid dependent or a traditional charter, right? And so that's a little bit more of a complex situation.
So is it just in terms of, I guess it's not a worry, but I see definitely the benefits of remote learning for many students, and I see that as a great choice to have and to maintain. What I don't know yet is the degree to which that could, flourish and grow post-COVID. And I'd love to, I know that there are examples of that being true. I don't know what they look like, so that's all.
Yeah, I think it's very hard to prognosticate, right? What schooling will look like post-COVID, or when that will be. And I think really, it depends upon if this is the route we go. It depends upon how the charter is written. And there's always room to amend charters as well. And so I don't think it makes us inflexible about other options.
Okay, thanks.
And Marika, I just want to also say that, again, like this is an example, but you could have another example that we also discussed at length in the committee, which would be, I think the committee thought if we were going to do a hybrid, another good option might be a K-5 dependent charter, or dependent charter in the lower grades, and then a traditional in the middle school grades. For the reason, one of the primary reasons that Dr. Garcia cited, which was the maximizing of funding with the dependent charter component. So that's something that, hopefully the two boards can discuss.
I think the only other caveat there is with an in-person dependent charter school, we still have to offer a traditional school option. And so if we offered no traditional say K-5, then that puts us back in the land of needing to offer an interdistrict transfer agreement, which is, I think, why the recommendation here is charter for distance learning.
Thank you.
And we would need just real quick, we would need a vote, I think, of any of the traditional K-5 teachers to then convert to charter also.
Correct.
It's a mess. Right.
Sorry, Kurt, to cut you off. I just want to finish that thought.
That's all right. And so when we think about remote, can students then in this structure, can students freely move between schools? So if a student is in the traditional school environment, they have a family member that, God forbid, gets sick and they need to quarantine. Do we do an internal transfer of that student to the remote learning school so that we don't have to run two remote learning programs? How would that work?
That's a great question, Kurt. One benefit of it being a dependent charter school is that actually we could transfer kids, back and forth between the schools in a relatively easy fashion. I think we just have to craft our board policy in a way that allows us to do that.
Yeah, because that's when you and I were talking about this a couple months ago. That was the idea that you could leverage the charter model in a remote environment, gives flexibility, and just making sure that everybody understands there's freedom to move still as a unified. You still want to think as a unified system, having two channels of education versus two schools, right?
Correct.
Right. Yeah, I think the idea was that the programming, curriculum, the progress of the grades between the traditional and the remote charter would be synchronous, so that if a student transferred between the two, they wouldn't be jumping it ahead or behind of the other program.
I had a question.
Go ahead, Josh.
So I'm kind of losing the point of the dependent charter in this option. Wouldn't it be simpler to just make it traditional with both a distance learning component and an on-site component?
Yes.
Yep.
So why is this the first thing we're talking about?
Well, this allows us to still retain some of the out-of-district LCFF revenue.
I think.
Has that been quantified?
To a certain extent, we have some ballpark figures around how many kids are out of district currently in the charter. And, so it's the LCFF formula times the number of out of district students.
Times 25%. Right?
In this case, times 70%.
70, right, okay.
Maybe weren't those a requirement though? And maybe that's changed. It's changing almost daily, that students attend school in order for the districts to get funding, and that a full remote learning option was not permitted, and that a distance learning charter would allow that option for parents who prefer like a homeschooling type approach.
Yes.
I've heard different
The homeschooling approach would be an approach that operates as a it could be a dependent homeschooling approach within our district, but it would be run separate, and it would most likely have its own state number.
So I think, Josh, to your question, it was another, it was a way to provide a learning option for parents who wanted to do like a homeschooling type full distance learning, given some of the requirements within the state, as I understand it today. Because I know that as cases spike, some of the parents I've heard from are quite uncomfortable coming back to school with any class size.
Yeah, it appears pretty financial driven. I mean, just the rough math of about 100 kids going from 70% down to 25, if I heard correctly, talking about $350,000 a year in funding, maybe a bit more for the issues that Caroline you're bringing up now. And I don't want to call that an insignificant amount of money, but the complexity that is introduced to hang on to maybe $350,000, $400,000, including, I look at this as a parent and say, what is my school community? so much about deciding where you send kids. It's about kind of the community you've joined and you might be maintaining. And if the majority of the Willow Creek families are, in this model, almost pigeonholed into a remote learning program to retain their funding, is that the kind of community people want this fall or whenever it might happen? So I have a lot of questions around this.
Thank you, Josh. I just want to ground everybody that, you know, we're trying to present several different options here through this. And, you know, they can be modified and amended. And the idea is for us to have this discussion so that we get to what we believe are the best options for our community.
Are there any other questions and comments on structure?
Just had one, and I'm sorry, this is Bonnie, a clarifying question. Do we, as I understand it, the independent charter has to accept all students up until the level that they can absorb more students, right? Whether from out of district? Is that true for the dependent charter?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we would be, okay. So we might be a key option for parents that wanted to do remote learning for the coming year, wherever they are.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Next topic, please.
Can I just ask a question of clarity? Dr. Garcia, did you say that was just one option and there are others that we're going to be talking about throughout our next hour or two?
Yeah, I think, you know, pending people's questions, you know, our goal here is to lay out the options that we believe are the strongest options and to have a discussion around it, and to see if that discussion leads us towards some guidance around where we should get feedback from the community.
Thank you, sir.
Just to further clarify this, does that mean then, since we're having questions about this one option, that there will be others that will be put in front of us tonight?
Not true.
Well, given the heat mapping that we've done, we wanted to present this option as this sort of path of least resistance. And then given the discussion, we can consider any of the options that have been laid out in the prior meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So Lexi, do you want to talk about what governance could look like under this option?
Yeah. So governance under this option, as I started to allude to on the prior slide, would be done by the school district board, and we examined a lot of pros and cons about whether or not the district board could be expanded in terms of number of seats. There were a lot of procedural issues with that. We can go into that. That would refer back to the heat map, but we can certainly cover that. And there would be no guarantee of representation for any particular community. So looking at the option that we just had on the prior slide, this would be oversight by, and the governing board would be the school district board, and then there would be an advisory board. We discussed the idea of culling the members of the community from the work groups into the advisory board. That would enable us to build particular areas of expertise on the advisory board, particular areas of experience, and as I mentioned, that the folks that have already participated in the unification work groups. The idea was that the advisory board would have 1 to 2 seats at the dais, and that would enable those members to have direct dialogue with the district board. And of course, they wouldn't be limited to the rules regarding public participation. That was one option for governance that we discussed, and that seemed to be a good fit with the prior slide as a model.
Thank you, Lexi. Yeah, I just would like to add, you know, we would consider, we've talked about maybe considering rotating advisors based on their expertise or experience related to a certain topic or topics on a board agenda. And that maybe those advisors would also come from people that have participated in the unification work groups.
Questions, comments, feedback?
I would love to understand, what are the goals for governance? So I get you've got the structure, but kind of structure follows strategy. What are we looking at for the goals of governance?
I can just jump in and say, I think that the goals for governance are the same goals that we want for any overseeing body, which is, you know, we want to trust that they have the interest of all students, that they're making good programmatic curricular decisions, that there's transparency in decision making, you know, that they're listening to the community concerns, that they're fiscally responsible. Just, you know, it's just a couple examples of things that I think we would be looking for in our oversight governance.
And then also, in the past, the governing board participates in workshops and study groups where you can further explore goals and mission statements and so forth of the board, of the members that comprise that board, and perhaps even advisory board committee members or whomever would participate in that study group.
It's also, we talked about that not only the board, but the advisors on the board would have a premise under which they operate, and that decisions are made in the best interest of the children at the school and the families of the children that attend the schools.
This is Jim, just a comment or reaction to the notion of an advisory board. I think I understand generally why that might be useful, but it seems like something that would come after there's, you know, a strategy, an implementation plan, and then, you know, we collectively agree that there are knowledge gaps or subject matter experts who would be useful in the transition period for specific purposes. But I'm concerned until we get to that point that the discussion about an advisory board could be, well, first of all, I'm not a fan of them to begin with, so I'll reveal my bias, because it's a non-voting group, and I don't want to make a statement or express concern that the elected board would not listen to the advisory board, but yet advisory boards by their nature are non-voting, and basically the elected board has all the votes and can choose to do whatever that board wants to do. And so I think it really becomes more powerful if there's a very specific reason to have advisors. The other concern about it would be if the advisors are used as a representative group to obtain feedback on decision making, it could actually work against the notion of transparency to the extent that's accepted as a representative view of the community or community experts. It could be a way that might hinder full transparency on decision making. So those are my concerns. I'm sure you've thought about those things, but I just want to leave those with the group. Thank you.
Actually, Jim, we have thought about it and talked about it in great detail, and this is a great opportunity for our boards to talk about what does this look like, because I have agreed with Jim that there needs to be some real specifics and something that leads to trust.
So I have a quick question. Certainly in the corporate world, and I think elsewhere, when two longstanding organizations decide to merge, it's common as an effort to create cohesion, to try to develop sort of a coalition leadership where you take some leadership from both organizations, and at least on a transition basis, you provide them, leadership of both organizations, a role in leadership of the new organization. I know that was part of the thinking behind this notion of expanding the board from 5 to 7, and at some point I would like to go back to that and discuss it in more detail. But did you guys consider that issue, and whether you could find a way to develop a sort of at least transitional coalition leadership that would help give confidence to the kind of constituencies of both schools?
Yes, we did. We talked about it quite a bit. And there's a lot of sort of legal and regulatory challenges to expanding the board or having non-elected people vote around public funds, and that's why we are coming forward with this as an option.
And the idea of appointing members to the board, Ed Code does refer to appointments, and you need to go through a public notice process, receive applications, interviews, and it needs to be an independent, unbiased process. So our board could not just decide to appoint 2 Willow Creek board members without, I think, violating that process, presenting bias, and perhaps even violating the Fair Political Practices Act in that appointment.
I'm curious.
I guess I'm just curious, Jeff, what are you envisioning as far as a coalition leadership? What do you envision for that?
Well,
given the elected board.
I'm not sure that I can tell you that I have a fully formed theory there. Only the notion that if you have a coalition leadership, if you have the constituencies believing that their leadership will have a role in the transition, that will help keep people in the system. In terms of the issue around appointments, I recognize that issue. It seems like if we as a group develop consensus that the aim here was to, appoint people in these new seats who are going to, as much as possible, contribute to governance and contribute to trust, there wouldn't be a pre-commitment, but there would be a clear understanding of what the goal was in who you want to select. And so maybe that would suffice to, create confidence. Anyway, it's just, these are just thoughts I have, because I think leadership is a big issue. Trust in leadership is a big issue. And so I just wanted to get your thinking on, how far down the path and how many details you've already wrestled with on how you can develop a leadership that creates confidence coming in from both organizations.
Yeah, and we did explore converting from a 5-member board to a 7-member board, and looking at Ed Code that requires, first of all, county approval of that, and then the county commission would need, their county board, there's a county commission would need to approve that, and then you would need to gather signatures, and you actually have to put it to the voters, so it would need to be on the next ballot to go to all the voters to add 2 more seats to the board. And then if those were approved, then you would go to the appointment process, and that would go to the process that you and I just talked about.
At some point, I don't know if you're going to do that in this presentation, but at some point, could you walk us through the details of that, the Ed Code and the timetables and the procedural steps?
I can find the Ed Code that I referenced. It's many different paragraphs, and there's pieces that are in multiple different paragraphs. But let me find it, and as we continue the discussion, I can reference you the sections.
And Caroline, maybe this kind of goes to Jim's request for follow-up documentation, and we can just share out the follow-up documentation with all the board members, and as we continue through with this process, maybe this is something that we'll lift up and take a deeper dive into.
Superintendent Garcia, just 2 points. There are 2 issues here that have been raised in this discussion. One is, as was suggested in other sectors, when you merge, the new governing body tends to reflect representation from both of the merging entities. And so that's one thing you're wrestling with. And an advisory board with specific access to the district governing board, at least right now, is an option that's been presented to this group. But the second stream of thought has been around whether or not that advisory board reflects the opinion of the community. Later in this agenda, you'll talk about community engagement, but I want you to see those things as two distinct points of discussion, and you ought to, and I am certain you intend to have a robust way for community to get involved, and that may or may not feed into the advisory board, but the two are not the same. The advisory board won't be the voice of the community. You ought to consider, and that'll be later in the agenda, a robust process for community engagement.
Thank you, Dr. Omowale.
I just ask one clarifying question, and it might have just been that I missed the beginning of Lexi's presentation. When we talk about the advisory board with 1 to 2 members of the dais, is it an advisory board that's larger and it has 1 to 2 members at the dais, or is that the advisory board?
No, it's larger with one
Okay.
at the dais.
Got it. Thank you.
And Dr. Garcia, you look like you wanted to add something. I just wanted to go back and address Jeff's point too.
Go ahead, Lexi.
Well, I just think that the coalition leadership idea is a good idea, and we should explore that more. Because, but I'm unclear about, I mean, I think we should maybe brainstorm about how that would occur. You know, what group does, I mean, if you're talking about a coalition leadership that would transition, help the transition, you know, is that drawn from, for example, the Willow Creek community and the Bayside MLK community, and is it the existing board of Willow Creek and the existing district board, or is it a new formation? You know, questions like that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then we have how would the different coalition leadership blocks be appointed?
It would also be good to understand the freedoms that exist in a transition that might not exist later on. Is there any sort of grace period for coming up with something that's more of a transitional body that can then disappear when needed? Obviously, I think the goal is to not require, you know, an advisory group, because you've got the representation there that's representative, right? And I don't know what latitude exists within the Ed Code or within this process, given that it's fairly novel, right?
And the other issue is that it goes back to Jim Henry's point, which is you could have two coalitions working together to facilitate the transition, but those coalitions don't have voting members. So, and also then what's the communication between the coalition to the district board? And how does that facilitate in a way that's transparent to the community?
I have a question. Josh? I'm curious why an advisory board structure is recommended versus the committee structure that's more traditional, if you will, and also to me seems a little bit more flexible in terms of composition, time frame, and addressing some of the purpose kind of concerns that were raised earlier.
Well, that's a really good option, and I think our only desire with this slide was, you know, to synthesize quite a bit of exploration that we've had on this topic, and then bring it to both boards to actually have the conversation that you're having. So, thank you for offering that. I think that's another really potentially promising route would be to have board-appointed committees, ad hoc committees, superintendent committees, even. That could be made of different members of the community at perhaps, if it was a superintendent committee at my choosing, if it was a ad hoc board committee at the choice of the board.
I think the reason we use the term advisory board or advisory committee was that there was concern that just a committee may not have the same access to the board or concerns. We wanted to, I think the advisory board was meant to be something a little viewed a little bit differently, and that also would have members at the dais.
Yeah.
But essentially, it is a committee.
Yeah, I mean, that's
for me, the presence on the dais was a big deal.
But couldn't we invite committees to participate at whatever length at the dais that we chose appropriate?
Yeah, I think that's a consideration. Yeah. Yeah.
I do think it was a really important point that Marika brought up around time, right? So we're trying to build trust over time. So, you know, the goal of building trust is then you have that trust. You no longer need the structures in place to hold things up. And so I think part of it is, in the short term, I think building trust, you know, we should explore how do we have engagement with individuals from both boards, working through from a transition standpoint, building that trust there, and then also at the same time on a community level and others, then how do we then expand that beyond, right? So that dissolves, disappears into what is a truly unified environment. I think that's an interesting thing, is to bring kind of time into that, time and need into the equation. Because I think what we need in the short term will be different than what you need in the midterm and long term. And I think that could be a cool way for us to brainstorm different ideas around you know, transition, coalition.
Can we shift to the next topic?
Yeah.
Before we shift, can I just say that I agree with that, Kirk, no doubt. I think this is a huge step where we are right now. You know, our second joint meeting, and so that the public can see that we are working together, and that is trust building. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it all kind of morphs out in terms of how you have an elected board and an appointed board marry in some way. So I am interested and dedicated to the process.
Yeah, Kurt, I too appreciate your timing comment. I think that really frames this well. So I really like that concept. And I think we do have, as President Green just mentioned, this joint board meeting is one example. Our work groups are another example. Our unification task force is another example. So we've got a lot of trust building that's gone on now for the past year. And I do think that that's the pathway forward.
And just to be clear, Marika brought it up, so I was just
Marika, and then amplified by President Weinsheimer.
Yeah. Thanks to you both.
I do invite you to move forward with the next topic, please.
I will. Thank you, Omawali. And I just want to say, thank you for all of your comments and feedback. Like, this is exactly the idea. All of our heads are better together. And I think, you know, from my standpoint and the conversations that we had in the UTF around an advisory board, it was really, you know, to signal this commitment to trust and collaboration, and for it to last however long it needs to last, right? If it needs to last a year, or if it needs to last 3 years, or whatever the case might be, you know, this is about building trust, and we felt like this was an option that could help us do that. That isn't all wrapped up with a bunch of different ed code and, you know, government bodies making decisions about different things. Moving to the next topic, which is grades band. So, hey, one question from the public people wanted some detail on, and here we are. I want to invite
me, Trustee Turner.
Trustee Turner.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to follow take this opportunity to applaud what Jeff said, what Kurt said, what Marika said, what we're all saying, I think, and, you know, is that we've been building trust through our work together for the past year. And when we are unified, the issues before us will just be doing the best we can for the students. And with looking at the surveys that were taken by, I think, let's see, about 700 individuals, including students and parents and teachers, staff, and community members, looking at the outcomes of those surveys, and along with looking at the challenges that COVID-19 present us with. The plan option that this task force is supporting or putting out there is the option we think makes the most sense is K-5 on Nevada Street and PK through TK and 6 through 8 on Phillips. The survey results you can see here on the next slide.
Let me advance that for you, Deborah.
Thank you. I can do it on what so you can see that the one campus, Willow Creek, was favored, I guess you'd say, but with the challenges of social distancing and facility conditions, that really isn't a good option. So we're looking then at the two campuses, and that's how we arrived at the recommended or primary option that that appeared on the first slide. Trustee Van Alst and I think Marika and Superintendent Itoko have gone into some of the classroom options that we have on both campuses. I'm going to ask Dr. Garcia to walk us through the next two slides.
Yeah. So as you can see, I was trying to keep up there with the slide advancing.
Itoko?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, sorry. Just wanted to clarify, just so people know, reminder from this, Willow Creek families were in general community, correct?
No.
It depends. Some people chose that. Some people chose.
I just think that at the time of the survey, right, there was a.
Oh yeah, that confusion.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just if you're seeing God, it's not that many. It's a lot of general community. A lot of that is families. So don't like.
I think the parents are both schools, and the general community also includes Willow Creek.
That's
right.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
For that. So we have actually been doing quite a bit of mapping of both campuses and looking at instructional spaces and looking at how to move around the campus safely, how to enter and exit, all those kinds of things. And a single K-8 campus, we believe, is really inadvisable due to student safety concerns under COVID-19 and the number of classrooms available on each campus, right? So basically, at smaller class sizes, whether it be 15-to-1 as we laid out as a potential option, or even at 18-to-1, there's simply not enough classroom space on each campus to do small sanitary cohort sizes like that. You're talking about loading very large cohorts of kids into classrooms together, which, based on our understanding of public health guidelines, is not the safest option. By spreading all of the grade spans, across, sorry, I just leaned forward and hit my computer. By spreading all of the grade spans across both campuses, there's 25 available classroom spaces on the Nevada Street campus right now without significant modernization or renovation or change. And there's 13 classroom spaces available on the Phillips Street campus. We could stretch that to 14, and you could stretch it to 28 on the Nevada Street campus, but then we're talking about, not having libraries at either school, and we're talking about probably putting a classroom or two of kids in an NPR, which is, from a sanitary cohort standpoint, probably acceptable, but from an operational standpoint and from an overall safety standpoint, something that we don't feel is advisable. And so we are offering this grade span option for your consideration because we believe it gives us the best chance to operate small sanitary cohorts for all students who want to come to in-person school in the fall, if that's when we decide to open.
And then I think we can't forget the added benefit that Johanna really expressed well to us in the task force deliberations, that a smaller class size, and I think she mentioned at the last meeting, also has educational benefits.
I'd like to add though, you know, I like this option. I just want to be cautious about backing into a unification go forward campus share based on COVID. So just if we can remind ourselves to put the non-COVID hat on for a future state, not to say that might not make a difference, but I feel like we need to kind of get our heads out of COVID at some point to make sure that we're thinking longer term.
Yeah, I think that's where having a smaller class size, if it has optimal educational outcomes, is kind of thinking beyond COVID. Like how would we, is this beneficial to continue this way going forward?
Yeah, so small class sizes. Sorry, go ahead, Johanna.
I think this is also a discussion the boards have to have, considering when we unify. You know, the 12 could be 1. If we could be soon. If we don't do that, what does it look like? The bottom line is, what is the best interest for our children long term? So it's a discussion I think the boards have to get when we get to the point of when does this unification take place? Because this is one of many, many factors we need to consider.
Thank you, Johanna. And in the sort of backup documentation, Jim, that you requested, I'll make sure that I include some of the research around class size. One thing I'll do is just take a liberty and give you a quick synopsis, but I'm going to invite you to read class size research to all of your heart's content, however far that takes you. But class size basically at 17:1 begins to show a tremendous benefit. And it shows a tremendous benefit and goes all the way down to about an 8:1 student-teacher ratio with sort of increasing benefits. And the benefits are in 2 groups. The benefits are for advanced students. Advanced students are more able to access accelerated instruction in smaller class sizes. It also shows a tremendous benefit for students who have experienced learning loss for whatever reason. Could be, you know, societal, could be structural, could be, you know, developmental, any of the reasons that have students experience learning loss and be behind. These kind of small class sizes, 17, 18:1 or lower, basically allow for students who are behind to make up as many as a year and a half or 2 years of instruction in 1 year, of learning in 1 year. And so I think for, you know, the long-term view, the long view of this community, I want to invite all of you that are trustees just to consider the benefits to all of our kids of having smaller cohorts, COVID-19 or no COVID-19. And Marika, to your point, and just to ground everyone, you know, we did these surveys on how to configure the campuses before COVID-19 ever came out. And so I think, you know, this is, at least from the feedback that we got, and this was a longer view from the very beginning.
I just want to add that we also thought there's side benefits, that smaller class sizes also allow us to keep, you know, as many teachers as we can from both schools, and then likely need to hire additional teachers where we can hopefully add teachers of color. And Dr. Garcia's tapped into certain programs to help us bring in teachers of color. So there's some other additional benefits.
Great.
I want to observe, we talked about this same topic in the last meeting, and it struck me that we already have these small class sizes at Bayside MLK. And so in that case, we're talking about preserving an existing benefit, not introducing something new. This would be a new benefit potentially for the children at Willow Creek who have slightly larger class sizes. but it seems to be being introduced without that context, and that's confusing to me.
Are all the classes at BMLK small? I thought some of those classes had over 20 kids in a classroom.
You are correct, Trustee Green. Trustee Barrow, what you put forward is true for many classes, but not for all.
Okay.
So some would go down, some would go up.
Sure. Yeah.
And this does allow us to achieve this benefit for all students, and also probably like reduce the number of things like combination classes.
Got it.
So I do have a question, or maybe it's more of a request. Although I would definitely love to see the class size educational research, and I mentioned this to Itoko separately in a private meeting, I would also like to see the research on outcomes, the relationship between outcomes and K-8 configuration versus K5/6-8 configuration. Back some years ago when Bayside and MLK merged, there was a lot of discussion around whether the K-8 model was preferred from an educational standpoint. And at least the feedback we were getting then was that it was. That may either have been wrong or changed, but I'd be interested to know that. And I would also like to echo Marika's point about, as much as we have to be careful about COVID right now, and we do, want to merge soon, I would like to keep our eye on the long term, because it may be that we could do some sort of process of phasing where we start out as a certain configuration with a goal toward a different configuration, and including thinking about, modifying campuses to handle smaller class sizes on a single site. And so I'd like to explore all those ideas and all that research. So if we could get that would be terrific.
Yeah, I'm
I'd just
happy
like
to send
to echo that. I know that many of the families, especially from Willow Creek, have been from the beginning very excited about the K through 8 configuration. So if there were to be this kind of change, I think it's worthwhile for us all to be better educated ourselves on that.
Thank you, Cynthia. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
I'm happy to forward that research as well. I'm really familiar with that knowledge base, and I'll offer you a similar synopsis. Invite you to read it and draw your own conclusions always. What the research on K-8 school configurations suggests is that students at traditional K-5 schools outperform students in kindergarten through 5th grade at K-8 schools in both ELA and math. Now, where there's a benefit to K-8 schools is in 6th through 8th grade, particularly in math. 6th through 8th graders at K-8 schools outperform 6th through 8th graders at traditional middle schools in mathematics. And the research is sort of clear on those 2 points. Everything else, you can find 5 studies to say one thing and 5 studies to say another thing. But that's where the knowledge base has some consensus. But I'd be happy to send that along for all of our board members to peruse.
I have a process point to the 2 board chairs. We've got about 90 minutes and 3 large topics, which perhaps gives us about 30 minutes per topic. And so with your permission, I'd like to exercise a little more time control in terms of transitioning from one topic. And those topics are staffing, budget, and curriculum, transitioning from one topic to the next.
Yeah, I guess, thanks, I appreciate that. And it's kind of that balance between having the depth of the discussion that's necessary and moving the process along, right? And so is there a way that we should we kind of set stuff for further discussion, or what would be a good way to kind of not throttle the need for depth, but also, to your point, keep us moving along? So I don't know if we need to.
Well, I would suggest 2 things. No, I would suggest 2 things. That for each of the 3 big topics, there are a number of subtopics that we let the Unification Task Force make all of its presentation on staffing, and not topic by topic discussion, but a discussion of the entire body of ideas around 1, staffing, 2, budget, and 3, curriculum. And then finally, when we need to transition roughly around that 30-minute point, we allow board members, individually and collectively, to lift up any other issues that they want explored.
Sounds good.
I'm not quite following the process, but
Yeah, let me just say, so when you get to staffing, rather than make a presentation on each topic under staffing, that you make a full presentation on staffing and have one full discussion about it.
Right.
That's because we've only got about 30 minutes for each discussion. That's the main point. And then to Trustee Kurt's question or request, that in order to not just cut off the conversation, that we create a transition space where individual board members can at least raise the questions that they want to raise for future discussion, like kind of like putting them in a parking lot that will get the attention of the two boards.
Okay.
One thing that I'd like to offer, if people have additional questions that come up, that aren't covered in the discussion, please send them via chat to Steve, and he'll archive the chat, and then we can bring those back to the Unification Task Force group, and we would really actually appreciate all of that feedback from all of you trustees. If you have questions that we didn't think of or that we're not getting the time to cover, we'd love to know what those questions are.
So with your permission, I'd invite Superintendent Garcia for us to shift to the staffing discussion.
no, we haven't. There's 2 slides we haven't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Really?
Yeah, they are. One is here. So we wanted to take a look at enrollment in a phased middle school unification.
Oh yeah, right. Heavens. Yes.
And so here before you, you have enrollment based on this phased idea where we unify just the middle schools, but we keep the elementary schools separate. And what this chart shows is it requires us basically to load classes at 25. And would require us, as I mentioned, there's 13 available classes on the Phillip Street campus, and that would require about a 20 student per class load across 13 classrooms, and then there would be 380 kids on wait a minute, let me take that back. There would be about 221 kids on the Willow campus under this phase option, which would allow for smaller class sizes on the Willow campus, but not on the Bayside MLK campus.
Can you just clarify? I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I understood. The 25?
Can you go back to that last slide? I'm confused too.
Yep.
So how do you get a class load of 25 in kindergarten if you've only got 16 students?
There isn't a class load of 25 with only 16 students. Obviously, there's 16 students. What I did was just divide the total number of kids by the total number of classes, right? So we could have small class sizes for the elementary grades, but we'd have large class sizes in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to have smaller class sizes in middle school, that would then begin to impact the elementary grades.
So a scenario where so there's unifying the middle school, but does that negate a scenario where we bring or do some facility sharing at the elementary level to even that out?
Well, it doesn't negate anything. I think in this scenario that's on this slide, only the middle schools are unified. and then figuring out how to do that in two separate entities gets to be pretty complex. Nothing impossible, just complicated.
So I perceive the slides up to this point to be recommendations. Is this also a recommendation?
No.
No, it's not. It is trying to explore this idea of a phased option, and so it's sort of addressing a perceived option.
Thank you.
So Itoko, at the risk of bogging us down, I'm just having a hard time understanding what this slide represents. So the 6, 7, 8 level with the 53 on both campuses at grade 6, 55 at grade 7, 51 at grade 8, what does that represent?
Yeah, so I see
Really confused.
for asking that clarifying question.
Yeah.
What it represents is taking all of the students that are in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and taking that 53, 55, 51 off of the Willow Creek campus and bringing them over to the Bayside MLK campus.
Okay. So the column that says phased on WCA campus, I mean, I get that about the phased on BMLK campus, but the phased on WCA campus, that would be taking all the middle schoolers and putting them on that campus?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
That's why I had to do a little sidebar math to get down to the number of kids that would be on the Willow Creek campus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Next slide, please.
So this looks at a voting at 15 to 1. It looks at combined enrollment of both schools, the total combined enrollment in each grade level, and the number of rooms or staff necessary to staff at 15 to 1 in a fully unified option. You can see there the number of students at each school, the total number of students, the class size assumptions, and the number of rooms and number of staff that would be needed to cover a combined student enrollment here of what's 475 kids. You can see there that you need about 33 rooms, and doing that math of the 25 on Nevada Street plus 13 on Phillips Street, it is 38 total available classes. So this even gives us like a few extra rooms if we think about full unification across both schools, all grade levels.
And off to the side at the bottom on the right, K5, you would need 21 staff and rooms. And so that would leave roughly 4 classes on the Nevada Street campus. And then TK and 6 through 8 would be 11.6. So that would leave 1.5 classes or 2 classes on the Phillips Street available. So those 5 are distributed between both campuses of what's left.
And again, this gets us down to a sanitary cohort that we feel is probably a safer option than 20 or anything higher than 20.
Has there been any assessment of how many students, at least this fall, are not likely to want to come to a class regardless of location? And how many students we know are already leaving that might be in these numbers?
Yeah, actually there has. There's a Willow Creek survey that went out. We have sent some surveys out as well. There's also been a countywide survey and a corresponding conversation with the current homeschool providers in the county. And the number that seems to be sort of the sweet spot is about 10%. Certainly no more than 20%. I don't know the exact figures in the Willow Creek survey, but I'm sure someone does. Maybe someone can help me out.
It's about the same, although we were going to go into the next stage of actually calling individual families because to really drill down and understanding, if their thoughts have changed or what their individual conditions are.
Thank you, Marika.
what about the other part of it, students who are not returning, irrespective of COVID?
So the 356 for Willow Creek, I think Johanna provided that to us, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's Willow Creek's current estimate of enrollment for next year. So that's rolling all the way forward, yeah. And then Bayside MLK, Deborah just got those numbers from David a few days ago.
Great, so it's already baked in. Thank you.
Any other questions on? Yes, please go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, are those numbers of kids that are already enrolled? Itoko, do you know?
I think the latest from Emily was that at Willow Creek, Ida, was that the 356 might be low, and that it could be up by more than a dozen kids from that. But I'd leave it to her and others on the board who might be closer. Thank you.
Yeah, I do want to just remind everyone, these are in every grade 1 through 8 current enrollees. In TK and K, their enrollment projections. But, you know, until we go through the first couple of weeks of school, as we all know, all of these really, you know, are projections. We do the projection work so that we can staff properly. But, you know, nothing's guaranteed until the first couple weeks of school, and then we lock in all these numbers.
Yeah, and just like Marika noted, I think you can take the surveys of who would attend in class and who would likely want distance learning now and a month from now, and you may get different results. So.
Yep.
Yeah, so right now I think we're projecting around 380. And so the kindergarten, we'll have to look at what the enrollment is for that, but I thought it was just over 40. It was 42 or so, but you always take the haircut as things go, and to that point it fluctuates.
Well, we've got room. It's only 3.3 rooms and staff.
Yes.
So could I ask the boards to wrap up your discussion on this question? Are there any other pending issues that you want explored by the task force?
The only other question I had was from a social emotional learning standpoint, Itoka, you had mentioned potential case 6 and then 7, 8, given kind of 6th graders grow a lot in that time. Is that something you guys talked more about, and what are the thoughts on that?
We talked about it pretty extensively in the unification task force. You know, I think I would defer to some of my other task force members. Although I personally still remain a proponent of that configuration, I think as a task force we built consensus around a 6-8 configuration. There were a lot of reasons given. Johanna, Alina, Lexi, Caroline, I don't know if you want to chime in here. It was quite a nuanced conversation. But, you know, things like maximizing specials teachers and resources, electives, so that 6th graders could access what we were offering 7th and 8th graders came up pretty significantly. But I'll defer to the rest of the group.
Yeah, I think we had some couple discussions about the way we kept grades together, so that, for example, if there were situations where older kids were working with younger kids, I know that happens on Willow Creek, that we wanted to maintain that tradition where, you know, people had younger kids had older reading buddies or tutors, or that was one of the things we discussed. I just also want to ask the question is, if you have a unified school but you're using 2 campuses, do you lose the benefits of having a K through 8 if you have them on different campuses, or is there a way that a unified school could continue to maintain cohesion even if there's different student bodies on 2 campuses? I don't know. I'm just asking the question because it seems like that would be something we could try and do.
Yeah, I think Lexi raised up a question of logistics, and as long as things are planned and scheduled, and we have transportation, there's no reason any of those things would have to end at all. I think it's just about the teachers making the agreements and then us figuring out as a community, logistics-wise, how to support the movement of kids in between our campuses, which is something that we will need to figure out anyway.
Yeah, I think another added benefit was just the size of the school.
Absolutely.
You only have 7th and 8th grade. You're at 106 children or so, which might be small and feels small. And I think Johanna had brought up some points around it's better to have 150 students to create at least that school culture and environment. But I also believe Mill Valley Middle School is 6th through 8th. So if we have sports programs where the students compete against other middle schools, that having similar grade spans would help facilitate practices after school, and that all grades could easily participate in those programs.
And I was just wondering, isn't it the traditional model for, say, of a middle school 6 through 8? Dr.
Yeah.
Garcia?
I went to a 7-8, but that was in New Jersey.
I went to a 7-8.
So I think there's a lot of different formats.
Today, the model is more 6-8, but districts do it differently according to the space they have, not necessarily, 7-8 and what's in the best interest of the educational program. Sometimes they can't do it one way or another because of the space issues they have, but 6-8 is the common one.
Thank you.
My only experience with the sports programs is basketball, and I thought we were in a different category because of the school size from Mill Valley Middle. We competed with small districts around the county. And in basketball, at least, it's fifth and sixth grade combined, and then 7th and 8th.
Could we get a response to this point, and then I'm going to invite you to transition to the next topic?
This is definitely needs.
Yeah, we do.
Gosh, we might need some more research on that. Thanks for that.
We do compete in a small schools league. That's correct. The question, would become combined. Are we still eligible for that small schools league, or do we look at some bigger schools? But we can certainly do some follow-up research on that point.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, we're at curriculum.
We are.
Okay, I'll be presenting curriculum. And so a lot of thought went into curriculum. I want to start with saying that having flexibility with our curriculum is paramount to our unification and unifying the both schools in order to support student success. So we looked at project-based learning, which is what Willow Creek Academy is already having, and I believe Bayside MLK started with some project-based learning as well. We want to focus in on science, technology, arts, and research. As far as having the shared scope and sequence of standards, we really want to create an equitable learning experience and having a solid starting point. And so aligning our standards and setting our scopes and sequences is very important to that. As far as, while we were throughout this whole year, we had designed these work groups. And so we want to make sure that we incorporate the recommendations from our curriculum team. forming and strategizing, being strategic with our curriculum. As far as collaboratively developing or having developed our collaboration amongst our teachers, it's important for our teachers to get together and collaborate, and share their best practices. And so collaboration, again, is very important, especially, again, in aligning our curriculum. And then leaving the opportunity for changing throughout the course of the year as we have adoptions change throughout the course of the year. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is, we want to continue with our having a strong and robust distance learning. As what was already mentioned earlier, there will be about, at least 10% of families, upwards to 20%, who may continue with our distance learning program. Whether or not it's families, parents who are uncomfortable sending their children to school, or there might be some immunocompromised students, and then family members of these students. And so we want to continue with making sure that our curriculum is fully developed, and we're moving forward in a strong manner for our distance learning. We want to make sure that the in-person students are, and the distance learning students have a synchronous learning process. And then what Bayside MLK were able to accomplish with their distance learning multi-tiered systems of support. I'll go ahead and let Atoka go ahead and talk about their tiered systems.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. So one of the things that we all learned with distance learning, was that kids engaged at different levels. And when we started to see the pattern become clear amongst Bayside MLK kids, we got together as a leadership team and sort of said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? And so this idea of MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, many of you may know the term RTI, or response to intervention. MTSS is sort of the RTI 2.0, or the 2020 version of RTI, but it's really figuring out how to create multi-tiered systems of support depending upon the needs of students, or leveled interventions. And we realized we needed this for distance learning. So tier 1 is like what we do for everyone, doesn't need much, doesn't need to belabor the point much. Tier 2, what we worked out for tier 2 was that we had a group of kids that were doing some work on distance learning, but not all work. We had a third group of kids that were doing very little to no work. And so for the tier 2 kids, we set them up with a mentor, an academic mentor. That person called and did goal setting with them, checked back in the morning, checked back with them in the afternoon to see if they'd met their goal, see if they needed any extra tutoring above and beyond what they had gotten from the teacher, and generally help those students accomplish those goals. So that's kind of what tier 2 looked like. Tier 3 was really the beginning of our return to school, of our in-person learning. Was bringing what ended up originally for us being 6 students back who were not able to complete any assignments on distance learning, bringing them back to school and helping them complete distance learning assignments under the supervision of a staff member. We really believe strongly that this is part of a robust distance learning program, and that while we may have parents that don't feel comfortable returning their kids to school and choose not to return their kids to school, there may be some kids in those categories who struggle and have challenges with distance learning. So we feel like it's going to be very important for us to continue to offer these options for students that are enrolled in distance learning.
Please continue.
Okay. So as we continue on with in-person instruction, I think what's important that we discuss here is about not more so with our elementary grades, but with our middle school, is that the teachers currently rotate in some, for I believe for 7th and 8th grade. And so as we look at, maintaining sanitary cohorts, of course we put 15-1 and that number is fluid, it might change. We need to look at how can, with COVID, the teachers will not be able to rotate. So 6th grade core, having a 6th grade core teachers, I think of at least 2. And then we have the single subjects for 7th and 8th grade. And then to make sure that we offer specials with art, music, and PE and theater. And then Spanish for K through 8th and world language eventually for 6th through 8th grade.
Yeah, thank you.
Alina, this is Jim, can I ask a question now, or should we wait?
Let her get through the entire curriculum presentation.
Sure.
Please.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks. I'll hold.
Yeah, and just one clarifying comment. My understanding is teachers can rotate through classes now. It's just that the students need to stay in the sanitary cohort.
Yeah, that's correct. That was what I was getting at as well, Caroline, is under traditionally what we have is we have cohorts of students rotate through different teachers' classrooms, right? That would be the traditional model. What we're suggesting here is a sort of that idea, but flipped, where the kids stay in the same classroom in their sanitary cohorts, and it's the teachers that actually rotate through instructional spaces. And that would be true for 6th grade core. That would be true for single subject instruction in ELA, history, math, and science in 7th and 8th grade, and would be true for some specials. My current understanding of the county guidelines for the fall are that we can rotate no more than 4 adults through stable sanitary cohorts. And so we would need to have a conversation about which 4 adults are in person and who is doing virtual instruction.
Yeah, I think we need to further discuss that. Okay, next slide. So enrichment programs, enrichment classes being offered for before and after school, or before and after school childcare, but for after school enrichment classes, coding, chess, Spanish, arts, including theater, dance, music, and drama. And then as far as after school sports, basketball, track, and then creating a system for monitoring student progress and effectively communicating with parents.
There would be also some additional opportunities for academic intervention in an after-school setting, community partners.
That would be great. Oh, this is where I'm also going to pivot for the next couple of slides to Atoko.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think one of the huge benefits of unification is really combining our ELD programs. If you all will remember some of the data that I shared at the last meeting, this is an area with English language learners where Willow Creek has had some success, although I think we would all agree that we would want to see outcomes for English language learners on par with our highest performing students, and we don't see that. Bayside MLK, this is one of the biggest areas of growth at Bayside MLK, is achievement for English language learners. And so unifying really would allow us to maximize the best parts of what's going on in both schools. So we do have an EL master plan. The EL master plan is filed with the county. It rests on a block ELD intervention, 45 minutes per day. The students are EL proficiency levels. So that's part of what I think worked well this year at Bayside MLK, that we could really maximize a unified program. And then there's some, as I said, pretty positive results coming out of Willow Creek using GLAD strategies. And there's a few teachers at Willow Creek that are GLAD master teachers. So really infusing this idea of a block ELD intervention with GLAD instruction, with coaching from GLAD master teachers, and really pushing beyond the idea that ELD is just for 45 minutes a day, right? At Willow Creek, ELD is what's called an integrated ELD program, meaning ELD is sort of integrated across the subjects throughout with the curriculum all day. And so really blending these two programs will provide the best of both worlds for our ELLs, and particularly when that process is completed and guided by teacher input and design. And I know that, I've heard this from the community, I've heard it from board members, we want to get down to the details. And I do want to invite everyone to consider, at a certain point, we need to give our community, we need to give our staff some guidelines and some marching orders, and let teachers and principals be the people that come up with the finest grained details of how to do this work. And so anybody who's, feeling a frustration about details, I want to invite folks to consider that many of these details need to be created by teachers and principals, and that really I want to invite us into the idea that it's our role to lay out some really tight guidelines in which they do that, and some goals, but let our teachers and principals color in the lines, so to speak. Similarly, with our special ed program, we would have an opportunity to really maximize our outcomes from unification, again, through teacher input and design. And I do want to say, this is a shift that is already underway. We have had 2 quite long special ed retreat meetings to figure out the service delivery model for the fall. And part of what we're eagerly awaiting to fill in those details at the Willow Creek campus is a reopening plan for Willow Creek, whether it's unified or it's not unified. We need some details there to fully figure out all of the details of a special ed program. But there's a lot of energy around going to a full inclusion model, where our resource teachers are either one of the 4 adults that push into a sanitary cohort and provide resource minutes and students' IEPs, or it's achieved via a social distancing pullout model, or this is something, another option that's not on this slide, but it's an option to consider, is that resource could be done over Zoom with the student pulled aside, much like speech therapy. And that we still have a mild to mod SDC class. We have not really been operating with a full inclusion model at Bayside MLK. I think Willow Creek operates with a little bit more of a full inclusion model, but it's not fully fleshed out. And I think unification really gives us an opportunity to create the kind of special ed program that creates really, really high outcomes for students. And that lines up well with a lot of the requests we see from parents around how students with different learning needs are really included in our school community, included in education. Lastly, we want to talk about intervention and coaching. We know we have some really strong resources in terms of intervention and coaching at both schools. We view unification as an opportunity to leverage that strength across for all of our kids, pre-K through 8. There's some wonderful content area coaches in ELA and math at Willow Creek. The idea would be to continue the relationship and continue those coaching positions so that they could coach teachers on interventions for kids who are falling behind. For distance learning, you could even do a push-in intervention with some of the intervention teachers pushing in directly with distance learning students and giving them some extra instructional time. This would allow us an instructional coach just to focus on pre-K through third grade. MCF did reapprove our PK through 3 grants, which funds our current coaching position in the district at Bayside MLK. So we know that those funds are available for next year, and we'd like to make them available to all of the kids in the district. There's a PLC, PK through third, that's being launched in partnership with CalEd partners. That's really focused on mathematical discourse. And then the other thing that we have already sort of paid for is these distance learning or online intervention programs, System 44, Read 180, Smarty Hands, Streambox. And we feel like unifying both schools together really would provide access to just a much more robust level, pre-K through 8th grade of intervention and coaching for all kids and all teachers.
So now we can have a discussion on curriculum. I think Jim had a question.
Great. I did. I had really 2 comments or questions. One of them was, first of all, thank you for all of the details around the different areas. In particular, I was interested in the special ed ideas at TOCO. But I wanted to just try to think as we move forward about how we can separate or ring fence the unique issues that relate to distance learning and the COVID situation, if we're thinking that as a 1-year issue, hopefully. And if that's a 1-year issue, then we have some very unique situations on both campuses, and whether we're unified or not, and immediately, and how to deal with that. And so I think everyone expects that's going to be difficult, very choppy, and the guidance is also somewhat fluid. But I would be very interested in hearing more in subsequent conversations about longer term. I think this is what a lot of parents want to know is, we'll figure out how to deal with the health and sanitation issues this next year and do the best we can with educating our kids. But when we look at unification, think about the long game, if you will. What's the outcome we're looking for? And to me, the academic side of it would be success in the next academic phase for every child, that they reach their full academic potential as well as the social and emotional side. And on the academic side, I think if it's high school, success in high school or beyond, then what does the data tell us we should be doing starting in pre-K all the way through 8th grade to give every student the best opportunity to be successful in high school? And to me, at the core of that is that we close the achievement gap in the core subjects for starters and understand what it would take to do that. And then we expand from there with the other things that might go from critical to important to nice to have. And so I have that framework in mind, and it's a little difficult when you overlay the COVID situation for the next 12 months to look past that and to really understand what does an excellent academic school look like for our unique student population. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Really quickly, just, I really appreciate you saying, what do we do in pre-K? And I think that's one of the best places for us to focus in terms of figuring out an answer to the question that you posed, because when kids are entering school at different levels of readiness, then things like small class sizes are really necessary to accelerate some kids and to catch some other kids up. When kids are entering, say, kindergarten or 1st grade, and there's a sort of common readiness for school amongst our students, then we're looking at accelerating almost everybody instead of trying to catch some kids up.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. I guess my first would be more of a concern. I look at the challenges both schools are currently talking about with improving their curriculum around distance learning to deal with COVID more effectively than we did last year. And then I hear the idea of not adopting one school's curriculum or the others, but maybe modifying and coming up with a new curriculum. And I think of the heavy lifting required for both of those, not only to create the curriculum, then to train the teachers and have them feel comfortable they can deliver well in whatever time frame we lay out. So I think all that work is absolutely necessary, but I get really nervous about this fall when I hear about all that work. And so that's my concern. I have two other unrelated points that I can wait on. I want to give everybody a chance. They're much less important.
I have a question, echoing off of what you're saying, Josh. When did the task force consider when would be the time to have teachers begin looking at this and talking about curriculum and shared curriculum? Because I agree, it's obviously they need to fill in all these gaps and color it in a way that will be effective. I'm sure they're all, even those who are on this call and those who are just getting the notes afterwards wanting to participate. So was there thought to what would that look like? Or was it too soon?
It's definitely not too soon. I have offered people extra contract money to do the work over the summer. Some folks are engaging. Obviously, it really depends on the guidance that we give the community as joint boards. I think you heard Jenny Schmidt advocate for an idea at the outset of this call. One of the things that we've talked about extensively is delaying the start of school.
Yeah.
And bringing the teachers back at their regular time, but delaying the start of school for students so that teachers really have ample time to do this work together. And, I think there's a couple different ways to think about it. One, and in some senses, to Trustee Barrow's concern, when teachers are the main instrument of developing curriculum together through collaboration, through cycle of inquiry, the training needs are less because they've developed the curriculum together already. Not to say that there's no training needs, but it's less than what's required if you buy a packaged curriculum from outside that teachers have no input into creating, and then trying to train them up on that. It's somewhat of a different process. I think that in my experience, teachers are more enthusiastic and have more buy-in and want to teach curriculum that they've had a hand in creating, more so than curriculum that's imposed from the outside. And so I think what I would invite us to consider is, on any of these options, whether we phase it and we unify just the middle school in the fall, or if we unify pre-K through 8th in the fall, or if we go for a full unification in 2021, either way, we want to really engage our teachers highly in this process of curriculum development, of ELD, of special ed, of general curriculum design. And then never think that, it's done and that we put a fork in it, but that is something that we revisit and resource constantly to fine tune during the school year, in between school years, throughout a school year, an ongoing process as an educational community. One thing that, probably could happen is that we have sort of an overall scope and sequence for the year that teachers create right when they come back to work together, and that they do the actual planning for the first 2 or 3 months in the summer. And then we have another break before, we come back for the spring, where they plan out the rest of the school year if they're not able to finish it prior to starting the school year. Either way, we're all going to have to look at modified curriculum when we come back to school. No one's ever done school in the way that school is being proposed. Single subject teachers are used to being able to rotate kids through their classrooms. Asking them to rotate their bodies through cohorts of students is a whole other idea about prepping a science lesson, for instance. So, whatever we do, teachers are going to have to work very hard at developing and creating new curriculum. I think it's a fair representation of the conversations that the task force has had, is that we're better off doing that work together in a unified school.
Other questions, comments?
I'll raise my second point if there's nothing else. I thought the sixth grade currently at Willow Creek involved multiple subjects, but I thought I saw in the recommendation here a single, I think it was described as core class. Is that a change or not?
It's not.
I don't believe it's a change. I believe that's how Willow Creek currently operates.
My misunderstanding. Okay. My third one was also pretty minor. The sports listed were basketball and track, and I'm aware of a cross-country program that already exists. I wondered if that would be preserved.
I think our thinking was maybe that is part of the track program and that we'd want to expand on those kinds of offerings.
Yeah, Josh, those were only examples, so we need to broaden that list.
Right.
Thank you. That's it from me.
Just to clarify, and sorry, on sixth grade, so that's at Willow Creek, there's two teachers, right? One does math, science, the other does English, history, social studies. So I don't know if you call that core or not, but that's kind of the current structure.
Okay.
I had interpreted core as you have one teacher like you do in K through 5. So I didn't know what was meant by it. That's why I was asking.
Generally, core middle school instruction refers to what Kurt just laid out.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
So I have a question of clarity, Dr. Garcia, on special ed.
Yeah.
It's my experience that some students in the special ed classes have like a one-on-one. So they may have a success coach that is, assigned to them, if you will, or partnered with them. And I just wondered if you guys had some thoughts around that and what that looks like, specifically if you're looking at pushing those kids into the mainstream class.
Yeah, that's a great question. One-to-one paras that really depends upon an individual student's IEP plan. If that's called for, if that's offered, if that's agreed. It's actually right in line with the full inclusion model that I laid out. The only difference would be, normally in a full inclusion model, we might have a paraeducator or a student success coach in our parlance that was there to help multiple students in an inclusion model in a general ed classroom. A student that had a one-to-one para would be in a mainstream general ed classroom, and that student success coach would only be helping that one student. That would be the main difference there.
Right, which is another adult body. So,
It is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Currently, we are only projecting 2 one-to-one pairs in the district next year.
So first of all, thanks a lot for laying.
This is funny. What I have is a quick question. Go ahead. Go. You identified research as one of the key in this context. What is research?
You cut off a little bit there,
Yeah.
Bonnie. I'm not sure I got your full question.
What is research? Sorry.
What does research say?
Bonnie had said, Bonnie?
Connection. What in this, you identified foci of technology. Yes?
Oh, got it. Okay.
What is research?
Research is a proxy for project-based learning.
So whoever Lisa is, she needs to mute her phone.
see, let me pull up.
So any other questions or feedback around curriculum before we shift to the next topic?
I just had one. I'll make it quick. So I do think that it's really important for parents, and again, thanks, Alina, for the way that you kind of mapped this all out. It is important to note kind of, I think this really speaks to the difference of maybe where we were in the past and where we are today. In the past, there were pretty big, sometimes differences in curriculum approach philosophy between Willow Creek and Bayside MLK. And the fact that now we're talking about project-based learning, we're talking about GLAD, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about so many things that we're all aligned on. I think that's a really important thing for us to all kind of realize, because I think it should give a lot of comfort and confidence to families both at Bayside and at Willow Creek that we're building on stuff that versus in the past. So I think that's part of when we talk about if we move to a traditional model, I think it's important to remember charter schools were built to innovate and test the system, but then collaborate in the traditional model and hopefully bring that in and blend. And I think this can kind of bring that to that cycle if we do this right. So I think that's a really important thing for parents to be kind of made aware of. And so thanks for mapping it out that way.
Okay.
To that, Kurt, and isn't that good to speak that teachers are already collaborating between the two schools and participating in joint professional development and so forth. So I think that goes to that point as well.
Yeah, I think many people don't realize that started like three plus years ago, and it's kind of come to fruition. So it's great to see. Thank you.
So could we shift to the next topic, please?
We can, that's me. So I want to talk about staffing, and I think there's a lot of good things that that we can get from the staffing. There's some areas for discussion. But to start off with, in the traditional model that we're talking about, all teachers would have to be certificated, and our intention is to the extent that we can, especially if we go to a 15-to-1 ratio, that we keep the staff that we have. There might be potential reductions in force, maybe in the classified area. We don't know yet, but we're just letting you know up front there might be reductions in force when we combine the two entities of staffs. What we look at, where we hope if there's a reduction of force, that it will not be according to some guidelines set by one group or another group, but that it will be done according to a commitment to a very fair process that looks at seniority and looks at the occupation that they're holding and so forth. There might be an opportunity to avoid some reductions if we can move people from one job to another if they have the skill set. The other thing is that the wages for all our teachers and classified too would go to the union salary schedule. At this point, we are at Willow Creek Academy, the total compensation package is around 25% less than it is at Bayside. So that would be increases in ways such as the healthcare benefits would then apply to all teachers in classified, whereas at Willow Creek, they are very limited, extremely limited. They would join in the current health plan, which is employees plus one and eligible dependents, Section 125 plan, which is medical savings and also applies to daycare. The retirement system, charter school employees cannot join PERS or STRS, but if we are a traditional setting, then they can join and they will be able to get into the state retirement systems, and the 403Bs then that we have at Willow Creek can be rolled over into that. I have 2 slides, so I'm going to go right into the second one and then we can discuss. The union specific, and this is one that might be a little bit controversial, that by being a traditional setting with a union, individual teachers can opt out of the union. That's by law. The controversy in that is that the union will negotiate for all teachers, not just the teachers that are union members, because all teachers are in the same salary schedule. So you can see, you know, little differences in opinion among teachers can happen. And I have personally experienced this, and you know, unions need to work that out. As far as non-credentialed teachers, the law is changing where Spanish, PE, and all the non-core subjects will need to be credentialed in the near future. There's an opportunity right now with the a change in the credentialing program that teachers that are working on their BA or have their BA can start working in a credential program without taking the entry-level math and language arts tests. Some people think that's good because it gets them into the program. Some people think that's bad because they're not tested. So, you know, it's a measure of competency, and that's just something that can be dealt with. That's only for 1 year. If we go into unification a year from now, then that opting in this manner does no longer exist, although they can enter into a credentialing program and could potentially do that next year, but they would have to test. Collective bargaining is on this slide again. That's my error. We've already sort of talked about this, and the step-in column is actually the way teachers are paid and also classified staff. We would make sure that our teachers, according to their years of service and degree, enter on the placement on the salary schedule as the appropriate place. We also are very determined that when we go for placement of our classified staff, that we do not have a method by which seniority is based on union and not on working at Willow Creek, where there is no union. And so we need to work out some kind of system. And I've handed this charge to Itoko many times already, and he's so glad to get it, but to work that out. And then layoffs, you know, if we have layoffs, like I mentioned before, or furloughs, that needs to be done in an equitable system. To me, the staffing, when we combine this two schools and make it a unified system, I've said this before, and I think I've said it in this meeting last time, that equality for teachers and classified staff is a non-negotiable for me. And our unification task force feels that way. I believe I can say that for them. We need to have all our teachers and classified staff on the same level, treated equally with the same regulations or steps or salary or whatever it is. So that's it. I tried to stay on track, and I'm ready for questions.
Good job.
All right, thank you. Just kidding.
Questions, comments, feedback?
Yeah, Johanna, this is Jim. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you for the excellent summary. My question on the process of identifying the required roles in a fully unified school, whenever that might happen, is the plan that you would start with basically deciding who we need and in what roles, and that then the roles would carry some presumably qualifications behind that, and then we look to see who we have that matches up well against that, and then who can shift from current to other roles. Is that the general process that you anticipate following?
essentially, if we have two roles that are the same and we only need one position of that type, which Itoko would determine, then if the one that doesn't have seniority, or hopefully some system that we can work out with the union, the one that doesn't reach to the top of that seniority, hopefully there would be another position that could to that person. But there's possibility that that may not happen. And in all transparency, I want to be perfectly clear that we will try to avoid layoffs, but most likely they would happen.
I have a question of clarity. Are all the teachers at the charter certificated?
They are not. We have some teachers that teach non-core subjects, meaning art or music and so on, Spanish, that are not certificated and did not need to be certificated in a charter school. Even if we remain charter, they would have to be certificated in a couple of years. The law has changed on that. So they would have the opportunity to step into these programs. I understand that there are also some very high qualified paraprofessionals at Bayside that might want to enter into the teaching world, and they could, under this system that I just mentioned, step in without taking the test, or they could get ready to be credentialed in the following year and then step into teaching positions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Johanna. Thanks.
That's my job.
Other questions, comments, feedback? Hearing none, can we go to the next topic? And I believe this is the last topic, is it, Dr. Itoko?
It's pretty much the last major topic, yeah.
Community engagement, we actually want to leave a little time for that discussion, but yeah, this is the last topic related to the formation of the new school. Yeah, please begin.
So I'm going to take this, and I'm also going to hand it off to Dr. Clark in just a minute. But some of the major considerations that we looked at in terms of budgeting, which we've sort of touched on already, is that charters get 70% of LCFF revenue for out-of-district students, and under an all-traditional model, we'd only be getting 25%. Usually, a traditional school would get 0, but because we made ourselves a school of choice, we get 25% moving forward. A unified budget creates the salary alignment that Johanna talked about. Considers new teacher hires for COVID-19 for smaller class sizes. The classified salary alignment, and as Johanna alluded to again, and I'll say again, might create some potential reductions in force. All of those things would need to be negotiated with our collective bargaining partners. It would eliminate the district to charter transfers in lieu, the above statutory amount of LCFF, the supplementals, the A bulletins, the ACES, the lottery. Jim and Dr. Clark and Heidi and Emily can all attest. There's like this whole robust process around transferring money back and forth, either from the district to Willow Creek or from Willow Creek back to the district in terms of the oversight fee or the cost for special ed, that takes a lot of time. A lot of hours, a lot of attention. All those things would be eliminated in a unified budget. We would also be able to eliminate professional and other contracted services that are duplicated. So those are some potential benefits. The kinds of things that would be eliminated, the need to contract out, and some of the things that the district could provide to a completely unified school would be business services, food service, human resource, the community school framework at both schools, special ed, the social worker. We got a grant from Marin Health and Human Services to have a full-time social worker at Bayside MLK next year. Unifying sooner rather than later would really allow that social worker to service the entire community. We're pretty unified on M&O at this point, but it would streamline that process around facilities, around utilities. The utilities payment is one thing that goes back and forth between the charter and the district. That would no longer have to. We wouldn't have to have a separate contract for EIT or have separated student information systems or websites or behavior management tracking or EIT infrastructure. We could really enjoy economies of scale around school culture and climate on things like restorative justice. That's happening really robustly at Willow Creek. And then the relationship that we have at Bayside MLK with the unconditional expectation coach, which is also financed mostly from Marin County Health and Human Services and is a contract through Seneca. We'd also get economies of scale in before and after school care and enrichment and insurance and legal, as well as in student and family services with things like enrollment and state and federal compliance. Essentially, the district office apparatus would be able to play a lot of these roles for Willow Creek, where Willow Creek currently has to contract out or leans on your amazing and talented board members to do a lot of this work. So I'm going to actually give me just a moment here. I'm going to make Dr. Clark a co-host, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and he is going to start sharing his screen. Give me just a minute here. Okay. And I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to invite him in for him to do a budget presentation around some of these ideas. I want to make sure that everybody understands really clearly that there's some major assumptions here. So don't freak out when you look at those red numbers at the bottom. These figures are merely to start a conversation and to inform the conversation that you all are engaged in tonight. They assume all current expenditures and don't account for any of the budgetary savings that I just laid out on the last slides. So this is keeping everyone and spending all the money and then some at 15-1. Dr. Clark, I don't know if I did a good job of framing that. You may want to add some things in there, but go ahead and take it away, sir.
I don't know what I would add. I think this is to your point, it really is just a start. What we did, this is a document's about a week old. I took the adopted Sausalito Marin City School District budget. You can see the revenues listed there and the total expenditures. And then this was the Willow Creek planned budget from about a week ago. It wasn't the adopted budget officially. This was the planned budget. And I just got that document on the 30th from Emily. So I haven't updated anything to this. But I will say a couple things I pointed out, and Dr. Arcia alluded to them as well. The adopted budget for Sausalito Marin City, if you look at the very top of the screen, number 1, 2, and 3. Number 1, it rolls in all current staff into the 2021 salary schedule. STRS and PERS were reduced. The contribution was reduced for the state, and then also the increase in the health benefits cap. So what we did with Willow Creek was we took, Trustee Van Alst was very kind enough to share the current staffing at Willow Creek, and also we gave a pretty good guess of where they are on the salary schedule at Willow Creek with their degrees and years of service, and put them in a kind of a ballpark where they would be transferring over to the district's salary schedule. We also, and did the same thing for classified, except classified we couldn't get years of service, so we just used the average amount for the classified staff. That's the 2,000 line. And then also for benefits, which you can see is pretty high, it's a difference from what Willow Creek just adopted, is that we took all staff and put them on the district's benefits structure, which is the, right now I think it's going up to the cap for certificated is just over $22,000, and classified is just a little bit higher than that because of the way the structure is. Then the 4,000s, what I have here, the materials and supplies, the professional services, capital outlay, and then other outgo, I just took that and left it directly from what Willow Creek had on their planned budget. So this budget that says Willow Creek, those numbers won't match anything Willow Creek has. I took your existing planned budget of these 4 numbers and left them there. And then I updated all the essentially personnel costs, the salary and benefit structure, and moved them over to the district structure. So you can see the total. One of the things we did change, so this is going to be definitely a working document from the initial document I did, was with the calculation at 15-1, I built this document based on 12-1. And so with 15-1, we actually have a different staff. So we actually have to have, I said that the wrong way. We have to actually add more staff to go back to the 15-1. And so you can see that I added in the cost of that staff. So yeah, there's a lot of red, but there are no changes in the other services, other expenses that both districts currently have individually, and what those savings might materialize as we merge together into one district. I think that's it.
I think the 125,000 you're assuming for the additional staff, that's for a fairly seasoned teacher versus.
That's the average. That's what we use when we're budgeting for any certificated staff member, because we give them year for year credit. So if someone, and that's only at step 10, in step 10, column 3. So if they have a bachelor's degree with 30 units and 10 years of service, that's pretty much smack dab in the middle of the salary schedule.
Okay.
Right.
And this also doesn't assume any additional fundraising that might be attained through a unified school. I mean, you can't budget what you don't have, but
that's absolutely right.
Yeah, there's some shortfalls that we could fundraise for certain programming.
That would be icing on the cake. I wouldn't budget for revenues that we don't have.
Exactly. Yep.
It seems that the negative revenue changes, particularly associated with out-of-district students, are not factored in here. I don't see that in the.
Nope. This is about a week or so ago. So as part of the changes, now that we have our adopted budget officially, because remember the district adopted the budget before the state did. So now I have to go back and make those changes to the adopted budget with the state changes. And then now that Willow Creek has their adopted budget, I could take their numbers, modify them to include the staffing cost, salary and benefits, and then that number will look very different.
I was actually referring to the drop from 70% to 25% that's been referenced twice earlier.
Right. That's not here.
Yep. Okay.
So the revenue goes.
What's the current amount we get for out of district enrollment?
Right about 200,000.
So if we lost, 2/3 of that.
Right. I think I did the math once. It's like $68,000.
That we would lose.
Yeah. No, that would be the amount. So you're down like
needing. Okay. We lose about 150 or 1,000 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
And this doesn't include any additional revenues, obviously, from the state sharing of the.
No. So part of the
pockets of money out there.
Right. So part of the joy of getting to do a budget adoption prior to the state is that they made some material agreements. So we have to bring back the 45-day revision. And so we took, the 10% cut here on this program, 10% cut here. ACES always comes to mind. We took a 15% reduction on the ACES funding. Well, now that's back. And that's back for not only the district, but also for Willow Creek. So the district's revenues and Willow Creek's revenues will increase by that 15% reduction because now it's back. So to Dr. Garcia's point, this is really just a start. There's going to be a lot of modifications to this document.
Since both organizations have taken their reserves to the bone, is it fair to say the ending budget, especially if it were to be for this September, would have to pencil out relatively in the black. Got to find 2.5 million of efficiencies.
That would probably, I think that would be a real challenge for us as a school district. But again, Trustee Barrow, I wouldn't hold a lot into that $2.4 million number, because we know the revenues are going to be different for both the district and the charter school, and we know that we'll be able to save some expenditures, in those upper object codes. So this is just a start. I don't see that number being the same, but I don't think it will be that dramatically different. I would imagine, if I was ballparking it right now, I would say it would probably be under $2 million, but it's still going to be the savings that we're going to have to find to get down to being a balanced budget at the end of the day.
Robert, I was going to suggest that if it seems difficult, I'm not suggesting that you're saying that now, because you're really just stacking the two budgets and adjusting the salaries for Willow Creek to scale. But if it seems difficult now to see a way with all the money that we have in the district for 500 kids to have a quality education in the way that we're envisioning, I think this would be an example of where we might want to expand to include members of the community with the right expertise to provide the financial acumen that we need to be responsible with the wealth of resources that we have.
I would agree. I mean, there should be definitely a working group between the district and the charter school going through the budgets to find where we can realize some savings.
So
great, thank you. And maybe some community members as well. Thank you.
I have a question. Considering that we're looking at two options for unifying, at what point do you think we could get a more accurate picture of the budget, considering cuts and other things that we would have to do?
Prior to the next board meeting, depending on when that is. It's asking me to put together the 45-day revision of the district's document, the district's budget, in a matter of days, at the exact same time that we're trying to start to close the books and do summer and summer feeding, et cetera. And then having us to sit down with Willow Creek and to go through their budget as well. I mean, we can move as quickly as necessary, but my proposal is that it will probably be incremental. There'll be a document that maybe gets us a little closer because it's able to realize certain changes, a list of assumptions. And then as we have more time, we can refine that and get closer to the end, or closer to a document that is more true to the final number.
Yeah, considering everything that's going on right now, that makes good sense. I'm just a little bit concerned if we unify in September, that we are able to meet our payroll and have our reserves and have all the necessary items in the budget to have it approved by the county too.
Right. So I'm not sure how it works to merge with a charter school, but I know for us as a school district, taking our unaudited actuals to the board, I mean, they are the reality of how we ended the current school year. Starting the next school year, the 45-day revision, which SACS is not required, but taking that document to the board, it would look very different. Going back to the board in August for a 45-day revision of the 2021 budget adoption, now having 400 more students roughly, is going to look very different. And so I'm not sure what the county may require us to do as that document, because they may actually ask us to put forward a full budget document and not just what we may, some of us in the know of a 45-day revision going to the board can usually be a very simple document. Just major changes.
Right. And considering that the boards have not decided yet when to go, I mean, you might wind up having to do a double budget. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, one of the things I want to lean into is, and maybe I'm sure there's other questions here, but maybe this is a good segue, is Jim's idea of, how to engage the community. We already have a pretty dedicated group of folks that have been working in FitTag. I would love if we can build some consensus around 2 options or 3 options or 1 option or whatever it is, to give the community some direction around what exactly we want feedback on as a joint board. And I hope that with Jim's and the FitTag's support and my support and Robert's support, that we will be able to meet and work through, 1 or maybe 2 or hopefully not 3, but maybe 3 scenarios. At least ballpark, because we are going to need to know, for instance, if we need to do a reduction in force to balance our budget, we're going to need to know the dollar amount that we need to meet, and then we're going to need to match up, positions and salaries with that. And so I think this is a huge opportunity for us to engage the community and get feedback, not only just on the budget, but on a couple of these different unification options that have been discussed tonight, as well as things like curriculum and staffing and all of the major points that we've talked about here. My hope is that we can give our community some direction over the next couple of weeks on exactly specifically what we would like feedback around, and enlist their support, not only here with budget, but on a bunch of the other topics that we've covered tonight. We have the infrastructure set up in our unification work groups. I know I've been getting emails from people saying, when are you going to enlist us again? When are you going to tell us what's happening? And I hope that now is sort of the perfect time to do that.
On community engagement, it feels like whatever process we lay out needs to be framed with a timeline under which we would understand what's the latest we could responsibly make a decision around unifying for this fall, whether it's for compliance or just practical planning perspectives. And then you'd have to back in a community engagement timeline to even keep that option alive. Am I misreading that?
I don't think you're misreading it at all. I have some things sketched out depending upon what your direction might be. And when I say you, I mean all of you jointly, collectively.
Was it just me? Oh, man.
Can you tell, can we get a sense of how many people are currently involved on those, the different committees or working groups?
Yeah, there was about 70 people that were involved in the work groups.
Okay.
And I think, for instance, like the facilities work group and the transportation work group have been waiting for months for us to get to this point, so that they can take a deeper dive. And thankfully, I think we're here. We're almost here. We're knocking on the door of being there. And then I think, obviously there's a bunch of people in the FitTag group that spent hours working through these large numbers. And now that we're a little bit closer, I think we can enlist their help so that Robert and Jim, I gotta tell you all, I don't think very many people understand how many hours that Jim Henry puts into doing budget work for Willow Creek. And I know people don't understand how many hours that Dr. Clark puts in doing his job for the district. And so, when we say we'll do 3 draft budgets, that kind of maybe sounds easy to people who don't have to actually do the budget, but we're asking for a lot of work to get done. And I think, having the community support and working through that is crucial, so that the burden doesn't fall completely on Dr. Clark and it doesn't fall completely on Jim.
So Itoko, we're about the targeted end for the meeting. I really do have a hard stop right about 7.
As do I.
Do we have a target for our next meeting?
happy to have that discussion. Dr. Clark, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
And I think happy to have a calendaring conversation. I think the other thing that I wanted to just quickly sort of get in was some of the feedback that we had from prior surveys. And
Sorry, just to be clear, we've got people with a hard stop in 5 minutes. So I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that, okay.
so I think there was some conversation around like how do we measure this stuff, and we talked about that: family retention and enrollment, academic achievement for all, school culture and climate, fiscal solvency. We think are some important metrics. And so let's have a calendaring conversation. When can we come back together again? Folks, I can now share the slide deck now that you've seen it all, and you can kind of ask some more questions. And then, maybe if that's something that can happen soon, then we can narrow down some options that we want feedback from the community on in that meeting.
Good.
So before I
have a sense of urgency.
Go ahead, Josh.
With the sense that we're going to have to either rule in or rule out the fall very quickly. So I would suggest we keep up our momentum and meet quickly.
Yeah.
Yes, I strong request there, given the amount of decisions that sort of rest on one option or the other.
So the Willow Creek board has a meeting tomorrow night, so we can't do that. But can we look at Thursday?
Or Friday?
Friday?
I'm going on the road on Wednesday for about 2 weeks, and it will be almost impossible for me to meet in that 2 week period.
Kurt, I have this question for you. I mean, can we, given that some of what we were going to discuss at the Willow Creek board meeting is related to this, can we swap? I don't know if we're able to do that or has to stick to the first Tuesday of the month.
I mean, we could definitely switch it out.
I mean, I'm not suggesting, if that worked.
Yeah.
We don't have enough time to notice a meeting for tomorrow.
All right, then never mind. Scratch that.
And we have a ton of things that are pretty time sensitive too.
Yeah, that's right. And so I was just,
I'm not available tomorrow either. So Tuesday would be out for me, folks.
What about Wednesday?
Oh, I can't do Wednesday.
Maybe we could do this conversation by email or a doodle.
Yeah. Jeff, are you gone for 2 weeks?
Yes, I'm going to be literally on a road trip for 2 weeks. It's a little unclear exactly where I'm going to be, so I just can't commit to any particular date there. If a date gets set during that 2 week period, I can try to participate, but it's very iffy as to whether I'll be able to.
Maybe Dr. Garcia can tell you. He's in Little Rock, so he might have some tips.
Inconceivable. I'm just saying it's very possible I won't be able to participate. I'm going to be.
Yeah, so maybe we need to do a doodle so you can align it to your trip a little bit, Jeff. I'd hate for you to miss the next meeting.
Yeah, I don't want to miss the next meeting either. I'm just, I've got this planned road trip, and it's a little be in campgrounds. I don't know what my connections are going to be like.
Absolutely.
Steve, can you send a doodle poll out right now to all of the trustees from both boards? And I hear you loud and clear, Jeff. I'm just gonna ask for everybody's availability for this week and next week. I do think Josh and Cynthia, that your sense of urgency is correct. One thing I do want to put out though is teachers are not going to report back to work until the second week of August, really, no matter what we do. And so, not to say that we have that much time to make a decision, because I really am committed to getting community feedback. And so I think your sort of sense of urgency is right. But I do think that we have a little bit of time prior to making a final decision to work with.
Well, in reality, perhaps we'll have a better budget idea also, as you mentioned, Itoka.
Yeah.
Well, at the very start,
We're
like
just
to start with, can we afford it or not, right? So let's start there so that we even know if we can do it this fall, though, the desire is certainly there. Be helpful. But I do think, Itoka, that for the teachers who are hearing that they're not desired, of course, but could potentially be some furloughs or layoffs, I mean, I feel like we do owe it to at least the staff, as the teaching staff, to try to move this forward quicker than the start of the school year.
I agree. And just to clarify that point, Cynthia, I don't think we're talking about really doing any reductions in force of any teaching staff. But we owe the same thing to any classified staff members that might lose a position. And so, and I think to Josh's point and your point, we need to meaningfully engage the community. We're committed to doing that. And so we need to give the community some direction around what to engage on sooner rather than later.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think the same thing goes for reopening, right? I mean, we have a community process involved there too, with folks really trying to understand what that's going to look like. And currently at Willow Creek, we're carrying about 4 scenarios forward, which is, you know, anxiety inducing and complex. So it would be great to start narrowing down some of the things we need to be planning around.
Same for
So you do have a doodle going out in
Amen.
Toco that's going to give us a better idea as to when we will be able to come back as in another study session with both boards. I know that people were saying they have a hard break, and not to cut you off, Caroline, so you can finish your thought. A hard break at 7. And before we leave, I just want to say, Cynthia, I hope you and your family enjoy your son's birthday.
Thank you. We did it, but most of the celebration was yesterday, but we're having a special dinner tonight, so we're all good.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Caroline, you had something you were saying?
You know, I was just saying quickly that we also have the bond resolution coming up with the project list. So if we can narrow down options, that would help inform that process.
We don't have a lot on our plate or anything, do we?
So Marika, you're going to be tapped.
Thank you, Jeff. Steve should be sending out a doodle poll in the next few minutes. So I'll just ask everybody to maybe give it 5 or 10 more minutes of headspace, because that email will be coming to you soon. The sooner you respond, the sooner we'll be able to lock it in when we have a general consensus. Dr. Satterwhite, we will include you in that doodle poll to make sure of your availability as well. Thank you for your facilitation tonight. We are almost there, people. At least in terms of, we got through the presentation mostly. And I think what lies before us is giving the community some direction. And then, as Josh noted, an engagement plan for that feedback from the community, and perhaps a timeline for making a final decision. And I think those are the topics that are before us at a next joint meeting. Thank you, all of you, for your time, energy, conversation, reflection, questions, and thanks to all of the members of the public. We still got 58 people here still with us, y'all. So there's definitely some interest out here in the world. I think we peaked at 80 today.
Are you asking us to wait until the doodle poll hits?
No, I'm not. I'm asking you, someone to move for adjournment so we can formally close the meeting.
Yes.
And what I'm asking all trustees is to not turn off your computer for another 5 or 10 minutes, because the doodle poll is coming. And if you all respond right now, we'll be able to lock in a date tonight.
Right. I want to thank you, Dr. Garcia, for interrupting your road trip and making sure that you're in a place where you can participate at the level you have. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. I'm here for it.
Thank you.
Whatever date we decide
Especially
on,
for
I'll be
taking
here
time
that.
from your vacation. Thank you very much.
That is awesome. So we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and second for the Sausalito Marin City School District Board at 7:04 on July the 6th, 2020.
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, Jim, you guys gonna vote?
Yeah.
We just voted.
Without Ida.
Committed to process, Kurt. Come on.
Yeah, that's what I was looking. Awesome. Okay, great. Do I have a motion to adjourn the joint session of the Willow Creek Board?
I move to adjourn.
Right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Abstained? All right. We're moving. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, folks. Drive safe.
Happy birthday, Matt.